finished this book today. Nuts. I've been reading it for a few months. It's about 400 pages. My Mother, Myself by Nancy Friday. A few years ago, I was, a few years ago, my senior year of college, we would come up to New York on the train sometimes. I would come to New York a lot with my then boyfriend, and, we would go to this bookstore that I loved. I discovered it when I was Miss Teen USA because we had this apartment, and I was 17. I was in the city by myself for the first time, and I kind of just wandered around. But I was a baby, and I was from Kansas, so I was so scared of taking the train. So I would just walk, unless I really had to take the train. So I would end up walking around the neighborhood, and I stumbled up on this beautiful bookstore that has a bunch of rare books on the top floor, and then if you go in the basement they have used, more reasonably priced stuff. They also have some steals. I have this beautiful collection of Balzac short stories from 1907 that I got there for $15 a volume. It's probably my favorite bookstore in New York, and I will share it eventually. I'll share it. But I went there when I was probably 21, and I was starting my novel at the time. I was starting a new iteration of it, where I was trying to write about pageantry, which, I mean, this is in the novel I'm working on, but a lot of pageantry for me, I feel is very ripe with mother-daughter stuff. For a bunch of reasons. As a woman, as a daughter, your life is always ripe with mother-daughter stuff, which I think Nancy Friday gets at so well. So I saw this book there, and I told myself, if I come back and it's here in a year, or if it's here the next time I'm in this bookstore, I'm gonna get it. And between then and now, I moved abroad to Europe for a few months, and then I broke up with my then boyfriend, and moved back to the US, moved to New York, and I had this one day, I had this really terrible evening, and the next day I was very hungover, very just, when you have just existential stuff going on, and nothing else feels real, and everything. I was sad. I was not doing well, and I walked a disgusting amount that day with my phone on 20%, my AirPods on less. Speaking of which, my phone is fully about to die right now. Let me plug it in. Yeah, so I walked with no battery, very little sleep, no good sleep, and I went back to this bookstore because for me, I used to go to the library as a kid. When my older brother went to elementary school and left me at home, my mom started taking me to the library, and she taught me how to read when I was 3. And the library for me, just being surrounded by books makes me feel really safe. So I have a crazy amount of books in my tiny little room. And so whenever I'm really not doing well, I go to a bookstore. So I ended up at my favorite bookstore in New York, and I went down to the basement where they keep the more normal stuff, and I saw this book, and I knew then oh, it's still here, time to get it. And I had this little notebook, and I was sitting down to write. Actually, I bought the notebook during this crazy long walk because I was I need to write. I'm there's a lot of stuff going on up here, and I gotta get it out. And I was sitting there, and I was angry for having read a lot as a child, because existential angst, I feel comes with ruminating, and you ruminate when you have a lot of stuff to ruminate based on. To be an overthinking kid, to have read a lot as a kid, and to have read classics really young, I feel you end up becoming a ruminator, and you end up just thinking things to death and being upset about a lot of stuff. So this is why I started meditating. So I was down there, I was writing, and I was writing about how if I had a daughter, I wouldn't let her read too young, which is, now that I say that out loud, it's ridiculous. It's so stupid. Like, I'm not gonna censor what a child does or doesn't read. And this, as I'm like writing this, and I'm like literally about to cry, if not crying, in the basement of this bookstore, this like little girl comes down and starts looking around. And this is not like the child section. She's like looking around at like, there's like an F. Scott Fitzgerald biography right in front of me. And I'm like, oh no, like don't get that. And I don't know, it just felt like looking in a mirror, which I think this book is all about. It's about so much. It's about how mother-daughter is this like mirror. Like, you are your mother's you're a reflection of her best qualities, her worst qualities. Like, you're kind of like her reincarnated. And it's beautiful. It's also like really frustrating because we go through these periods of like denial and separation from others. Like, psychological separation is one of the hardest things for both, because it's like, it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways, and in a way that nothing else will ever be. And some of the standout sections for me were about, a lot of it is about like intimacy and how you struggle to see yourself as someone with like physical and intimate agency, because in order to see yourself that way, you like kind of have to see your mother that way as well, which is really hard for people in a lot of ways. And there was a really interesting section on like, I know the internet buzzword is like mother wound. I don't think Friday uses that word necessarily, but if you didn't feel like nurtured in a way that you feel like you should have been, you'll look for it over and over and over again in other people. You'll look for it in partners. You'll look for it in relationships. You'll become angry when people don't treat you like that. And the ultimate pivot to like not do that is to take full accountability of like yourself, your life. But if you didn't feel like you had that type of nurturance growing up, it's like really hard to, because it's quite scary to realize like, oh, I'm in this thing alone. So that really stuck out to me. Another thing that stuck out to me is, I mean, she's just like so on the nose with a lot of stuff. She talks about how once you get past like a lot of psychological stuff, you get to this point where then you like convince yourself that you're like mothering your mother, which every dynamic's different. Like, I don't know you, I don't know your mom, but there are just a lot of different explorations of like dynamics, how they manifest personally, how we like create these narratives and separate like the things we liked about our mother, the things we didn't in our head, and like see them as two different people. And when we're like really happy with her, we can like look at this one. When we're not, we can look at this one. Like, crazy. But I think the ultimate lesson is like to not do that sense of separation. And by the end of the book, I don't think this is a spoiler because it's nonfiction, but Friday ended this book like so vulnerably. Like, she did not psychologically get to the point where she could think of her mother as like one. She was still like psychologically separating her mother as like good and bad in her head, which I think begs this like really interesting question of whether or not it's possible to like do that, to like see them in both, see like both of those versions existing at once. And I don't know, like my head, I think by now, if you've like read the blog, if you've read anything in the Hot Literati universe that I've created or written, you know that I love biblical allegory. Like, part of it is because of my religious background. I also just think it's like one of the most beautiful, complex stories ever. But whenever I hear separation, I think about like the Bible. I think about separation from God. I think about mother-daughter, like the reincarnate of that. I always think about like a parent becoming flesh and like something else, but then having to see that flesh like suffer, having to see that flesh manifest the things that maybe like they didn't like in their own life and didn't want to pass on. And yeah, it's such a good book. Not one of the best. I think I liked Reflecting Men at Twice Your Natural Size more, because I think that one gave me more of these implications that I was taking into my life beyond, but still really good book. I'd encourage you to read this, but I'd also encourage you to go to a bookstore the next time you're like terrible, down, awful, like hungover, sad, and just like look around and see what's calling out to you, because I really believe in this like ephemeral, like spiritual power of books, and I think the right one finds you. Like, we're also doing a thing on the website, in the shop, where if you buy like one of the quote-unquote custom books, we can hop on like a little call and I will recommend a book for you and send you that book based on a conversation, because I think recommendations are like so deeply personal, and it's nice when it's created like just for you and the way that you think, and I don't think an algorithm or like anything like that can do that necessarily. So thanks for watching.